Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Grand Rounds. My name is Tom Fardon, and I'm the chair and organizer of Grand Rounds. One of the things I tried to encourage back 11 years ago when I started doing this was to offer a Grand Round slot to colleagues who are either about to retire or have just retired as a platform to be able to talk about anything they want. And I remember John Dick was the first who took me up on the offer, and he was able to give a fairly politically charged talk, I remember at the time in the Gannick Lecture Theatre, as he was free from the shackles of actually being employed by NHS Tayside. And it was a delight that he returned last year, 10 years later, to give another talk. And I think it's really nice to have a bit of a break from what is sometimes very research-heavy talks or cases and clinical work, to more of a reflective presentation. And that's what Grant is going to do for us today. And in fact, his talk is called Reflections of an Afro-Scot from 95 to 24. If you're a surgeon or an anaesthetist, if you've had anything to do with Archie or you're a pediatrician, then you probably know Grant very well. But if you're none of those, then you may have just walked past him in a corridor and not really noticed, as we often do. But I'm here to tell you that Grant has been a really important presence in NHS Tayside for the last nearly 30 years. I met him in 2006 when I did my anaesthetic training, and he put me through the ringer doing anaesthetic lists. I remember those lists as though they were yesterday. And then I was able to spend time with him again when we did the Archie fundraising in the middle of the last decade, with a different hat on. So much love and affection for Grant from all of his colleagues that he's worked with, and a huge amount of respect as well, I think, for his clinical ability and acumen, but perhaps most of all for his calm, kind manner that I've been a beneficiary of, both as a colleague but also as a patient. So enough of me. Thanks, Grant, for giving a talk today, because you have retired now, and so this is you giving your time to come back to speak to us. And I look forward to hearing what you've got to say of your professional career. Thanks so much for joining. If you have any questions, then put them in the chat, or wait till the end where you can stick your hand up and we can have a chat. Thanks, Grant.
Thank you very much, Tom. That's a very kind introduction, and yeah, you're absolutely right. So I retired in February, just 2 months ago. So just still in the process of adapting to that. For those I don't know, as Tom said, consultant anaesthetist in Tayside from 1995 onwards. I've got a lot of slides. It's very pictorial. It's a bit of a travelogue. It's a little bit personal. It's a little bit of a reflection. I appreciate it's not medically particular and scientific, but I hope there's a little bit of something for everybody in this. I just will chat a little bit about my growing up, where I come from, a reflection on anesthesia, where it is now compared with where it was then. In fact, before 95, I gave my first anesthetic in 1987. Phenomenal changes. My particular interest around children's anesthesia surgery more broadly, and the children's theatre suite, as Tom said, and my engagement with global health, a little bit of a personal view on that, and then some random musings, hopefully not quite so politically charged, as you mentioned. So these are my grandparents, and my great-grandmother, that's me. I knew her for 4 years. She died in 1964. I was born in 1960. My grandfather was, they were Elliots. They were Scottish borders, cattle raiding thieves, who emigrated in a great migration in the 1820s. So we go back a long way on my dad's side of the family from the Ashkenazi Jewish sector in Eastern Europe. My parents, my mother, she was a very good-looking lady, and she brought up 4 of us. And that's the 4 of us. I'm the oldest. There's only 6 years between me and my youngest brother, Stuart. Just after me, 18 months younger, is Robin, my sister. Shame she's outnumbered by then Bruce, my middle brother, and then Stuart. And I didn't really like being angelic, as you can see. So I grew up in Cape Town, but we also hugely influential. My grandparents, they had a family farm in the semi-arid Karoo. If anyone's ever been there, it is really in the middle of nowhere. It's incredibly arid, isolated, stunningly beautiful in my view. And there's a picture of the family farm, which has just recently been sold. And we had all our holidays there, and we jumped out the car. And we just, as kids, we went feral on that place. Absolutely loved growing up there. In this picture, a few years on, the four of us, that middle picture, or the one top second from the left, I'm on the right there. So I had I guess you might say, chip on the shoulder from a massively privileged upbringing. I went to one of the top private schools called Bishops. I went to the University of Cape Town, and um, in a beautiful setting, and that's Table Bay, and that's Robben Island, and the stark and unbelievable contrast between how I was brought up as a white South African during apartheid, absolutely laid bare by Nelson Mandela, as you know, and he was imprisoned and encapsulated on this island, just a stone's throw away in Table Bay, and it was really just a stark gap between whether you have a religious belief or not, just how you happen to turn out in terms of your sexual orientation, the color of your skin. And it was to my great surprise and shock, really, what unfolded during the 1980s. And I still emotional to this day that the freeing of Nelson Mandela in 1990, and a traumatic few years that led to the first proper free elections in that country. And I hesitate to put in a sporting image from a sporting loving nation, but really, I think incredibly hard to believe for those of us growing up there that this moment would happen. For those of you who know, at the 1995 Rugby World Cup, this man, I believe, he espoused this value of Ubuntu. It's an African concept. There's many definitions, but it's about being bundled up one with another. For that we're intimately and intricately interlinked as individuals, and it's quite salutary when we think of the world we inhabit now. And another iconic statesman, and would that we had some of these individuals around now, both in Africa but globally, to be honest. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, a man of the church, but an arch critic of apartheid. And if you ever get a chance, just look at some of the quotations from these two humble, funny human beings, quite iconic people, really, and right up there in terms of 20th century figures, in my view. I studied in Cape Town University. I did my undergraduate medicine there, and then I went up to Edendale Hospital, a really busy, big African hospital during apartheid era, essentially a black hospital, to do my internship, my house jobs, and then another SHO job, an incredibly beautiful area in KwaZulu-Natal. And I've grown up and always loved mountains, and hard to beat, stunning, huge experience, but also huge lack of supervision to deliver that. And I think it's really important, the training and supervision that's provided. This is an iconic image from the 1976 riots in Soweto, which led to huge uprising and anger in the townships. This went all over the world. This front page picture of this boy, Robin Peterson, who was shot by the police in cold blood. And the fight to end apartheid, this was 1976, then continued at full throttle through the rest of the 70s and the 80s, with tanks in the townships and military service call up for those of us who were white and male. And I'm a coward, and I left when I could no longer postpone my call-up papers, and I left and went traveling around the world. Essentially with a backpack, I spent 3 or 4 years traveling and working throughout the UK, Scotland and Ireland predominantly. Worked in an orthopedic SHO post up in York over a winter, then traveled the following year throughout Europe, worked some more and dabbled and got into anesthetics, where I ultimately ended up by default, really, as many of us did in those days. There was no structure like we have today. And just to illustrate the contrast, there were no mobile phones or internet or communicating, and I would go to a general post office in a big city to hopefully retrieve a letter every few weeks to keep in touch with the world outside. An unbelievably different contrast. I did my anesthetic training in the UK. I drifted into it, much of it down in Wales, University of Hospital in Wales, and ended up with a year's fellowship in Vancouver, British Columbia Children's Hospital, really quite formative in terms of my subspecialty interest. And again, a beautiful place to work and live. I finished my training and came here in 1995. Moving on to anesthesia, for those of you listening in, whatever your specialty, you'll all have seen massive changes. And I think we kind of forget these things as we move along. And it is interesting to reflect, quite phenomenal in terms of drugs. The anesthetic vapors we used are no longer available, for example. The equipment we use, monitoring technology, surgical and radiological and medical techniques and investigative techniques are so far removed from what they were. And of course, patients are different. So if you look at where I apply my trade in anesthesia, so-called airway expert, we had standard laryngoscopes. That was it. If it was tricky, we just battled on and caused patient harm sometimes. We had black masks, face masks, and all reusable equipment. There's a lesson there in our disposable throwaway world now, I believe. This device, when I started, hadn't even been produced yet. And when the great and good witnessed its scene in Cardiff, where I was finishing my training, unfortunately, a patient aspirated on it, and it wasn't really a good omen for those who said, I told you, old boy, you were never going to introduce this newfangled device instead of an endotracheal tube. And when I started, we had no pulse oximeters. So the measure of hypoxia was whether the patient was breathing or not, the quality of the breath sounds we heard, and whether they were divided, whether they breached that divide with a saturation around about 80% on your hemoglobin oxygen dissociation curve, which was the differentiating point between cyanosis and not detecting that. Quite phenomenal, really, because now we visualize everything we do, both with rigid devices and also with flexible fiber optic devices, and not just for intubation, of course. Tom and others in respiratory medicine ply their trade with these devices, essential for diagnostics and therapeutic work as well. So I think that, we forget that there's a theme here, which is blind, landmark-based versus visualization. And ultrasound, it's a completely different landscape for anesthetists coming in now. We can visualize and look for air, for fluid, for gas, for nerves, for blood vessels. And the changes as well, for example, this image of a regional nerve block, a brachial plexus block, when I started, that was based on paresthesia causing tingling of the nerve or response in a nerve root, and then peripheral nerve stimulators and now ultrasound. And of course, for vascular access, both central and peripheral, we wouldn't dream of doing without now. But in many ways, even more profound, the surgical techniques, the big open procedure has moved to the laparoscopic procedure and now indeed the robotic procedure. And of course, that's got implications as to non-surgical techniques, and the role of our radiology colleagues, interventional radiologists, phenomenally changed what we do. This image, for example, of mechanical thrombectomy. And all of this has impacts on what anesthetists do, because we're essentially a service specialty, of course. And the National Audit Project from the Anaesthetists Association is now into its 7th iteration, has looked at baseline survey statistics. The seventh version looks at cardiac arrest under anesthesia, and it's hugely influential. And it won't be a surprise to you to know, and I'm sure in your own practice you see that as well, that our patients are older, they're larger, they have more comorbidities. And we're also into more and more ethical issues. And if anyone hasn't come across Atul Gawande's writing, I recommend highly all of his books. This one is brilliant around death, dying, and end-of-life care. But the findings from the NAP7 survey are quite interesting, and as the title says, really makes us think and reflect on delivering healthcare. So since one of the earlier NAP versions in 2006 to 2024, we now have 2,000 more consultant anesthetists, you can see on the right, and yet we're doing less and less work. And it's up to us really I think, to think about this very carefully and what we're doing in patient outcomes. Not just in surgery, but I'm sure in areas you work, this is something that's come along since it was not in existence when I finished my training. Surgical safety checklists, and again, you know, Atul Gawande's book, The Checklist Manifesto, how to turn a very dry, obviously outwardly boring topic into something interesting and readable. But I do think we should reflect a bit. It's very easy for this to become a la-di-da-di-da exercise and a tick box one. I think checklists are fantastic, but we've lost the focus sometimes in making them bigger and flabbier. And of course, checklists in really critical areas, for example, this one, this isn't about the detail of this, but this is an emergency rapid sequence induction scenario for the multidisciplinary team faced with a critically ill child. One of the more stressful things I've dealt with in my on-call work as a consultant anaesthetist with a children's interest. And of course, human factors has come in a big play in anesthesia and medicine in general. Again, it's not about the detail, but the infographics as represented on the right, how to distill simple information, and everything that's out there in terms of the overwhelming amount of information on social media and how we distill all this is just massively different, and we need to embrace that. I've always been interested in this monitoring, and when I started, it wasn't quite in the chloroform and ether era, but it was literally an oscillotonometer, no ECG other than for our sickest patients, no oximetry, no capnography, no agent monitors, no sophisticated monitors, a finger on the pulse, and that was it. And so I've always been proud to, I have been proud to be a recipient of this award at our Christmas awards, and Nob Fiddler referring to the dials and the monitors and the complexity of that equipment that we now use, which I think just dramatically changes what we can do for patients and highlights the individual pharmacological and other physiological differences, which are just so stark unless we measure them and monitor them. So twitching is about neuromuscular blockade measurement, brain waves, processed EEGs. The observant among you will see that this isn't a very good processed EEG on the top. It's a flat line with an ECG overlay, and this is excessively deep anesthesia. This is not great for brains, certainly the aging brains. Below it, a neuromuscular monitor, providing the refinement we never had before, and I've been a great fan of the microprocessor pumps which deliver us intravenous anesthetic drugs to precision for different patients. That's a much better processed EEG representing the right level of anesthesia for a patient. So I've been privileged to work with our association over the years, producing, standards of monitoring guidance, really pulled into this by a colleague many people know, Matthew Checkett's, now also retired, back in 2015, and then the latest version of this in 2021. And along with some colleagues, Pavan Raju and others, Ian Belford, and Joanna Lynch, a consultant, we've continued to be involved in writing, publishing, teaching, training, in-house, local, running webinars and seminars, which really, I believe, make a difference to patient care. So my children's surgery and anesthesia journey, this is the DRI, Dundee Royal Infirmary, way back before my time. When I came in 95, it was open. It closed 2 years later, and then the two big hospitals merged. But we did a lot of children's surgery in this place. And then over time, we moved children's theatres into a single location up on level 6 near the neonatal intensive care unit back in 2004. Some of my colleagues celebrating something. And then finally into the current location. I'll flash through some pictures later for those of you who haven't seen it. But essentially spans my career with an interest in this. I was pulled into this or encouraged to this by Mike Lyle, as the retired surgeon and medical director, who encouraged me as an anaesthetist to be involved. So the DRI closure allowed a single site for pediatrics. We developed a sub-anesthetic team when all anaesthetists used to cover children with various levels of skill and experience. And big moves over the early noughties with great resistance to change, to developing a service with dedicated lists where children weren't just add-ons and afterthoughts for adults. A number of pediatric surgical appointments, establishment of surgical leadership groups, and very difficult where children's surgery sits in between currently even the care groups, the women and children's and the critical care groups, into that dedicated children's theatre in 2004, and then a big long work on to May the 9th this year will be the second anniversary that we've been in the Twin Children's Theatre. I won't go into the detail about the privilege and the luck of being involved in the Children's Theatre Project. Suffice to say, it took a long time. Some things do. We were on a capital plan. The financial crash didn't help that. We were recommended by external peer review to really move, to expand children's surgery into a second theatre. And the big driver for that was the quality of dental anesthesia care, which was just done in the clinic area 2A, for those of you who remember. The contacts with the Archie charity, the few years it took from 2011 to 14 to agree a sign-off with NHS Tayside around a process, a governance structure. A capital project process involves a whole host of stages, which took 2016 to 19, and then finally a build, which happened to the credit of everybody throughout COVID. And I won't dwell on the project, its complexity, the multiple subgroups. Suffice to say that for me in healthcare, such an incredible opportunity to be involved with contractors, with artists, with creative people. In the top there, the architects, Balfour Beatty, the contractor, people from the Archie charity, and two absolutely fundamentally key people to this, Kay Farley and Lorna Wigan, now retired, who led and drove this, while I just provided a bit of clinical input. Some of you will know Susan Patterson there. So flashing through just a few pictures, it's a stunning area. There's a reception, it's demedicalized as much as we can. It's a model where we separate children coming in before and after surgery. It's like a bright waiting space, and then for individual consultations, we've got a number of clinic rooms and treatment rooms and procedure rooms. Fantastic artwork with huge detail. There's always a point to a Willie and the bucket trail, which we engaged with. But detail there and fun for both children of all ages and adults. There's a journey then down a corridor after assessment through to operating theatres. There's a theme of travel here, of space and underwater. You'll see in a sec, submarine, down a corridor, and children get there by walking, running on a trolley, or driving a motorized car, hugely popular amongst some. And into our anesthetic rooms, normally very, very cold and sterile environments. But here we designed one based on sky panels, which were chosen by children during lockdown, the children of key workers. And they chose in our 2 induction rooms a space scene and an underwater scene. And then our artists layered onto that. And behind it, out of the way, the sort of bad stuff or nasty stuff that we can do as anaesthetists, the needles, the drips, the IVs, the gases, the monitors, which are a requirement to look after children under surgery with anesthesia. And here's the underwater room, sorry, flashing through that again, paying homage to wildlife, nature, and the Tay whale. State-of-the-art operating theatres incorporating all the number of specialties working in there, 6, 7, 8 of them in this theatre, through pediatric surgery, orthopedics, ENT, etc. Beautiful open recovery ward for a quality, quiet recovery area for after surgery with some dedicated side room. Of course, I leave with much still to be done and many challenges: achieving optimal use, achieving best team working, enhancing resources, improving theatre utilization, all challenging and all the more challenging in the current financial situation. These were all some of the big strategic ideas. If you don't dream big, you don't go big. Unscheduled working, we can't put all children in this area. We don't put enough in there, in my view. Regional work, this is a capital project. It's taxpayers' money. We should provide and host services for other units struggling, in my view. Regional working and developing further outpatient working and better integration across medical pediatrics. One of the project aims we've not delivered, or not delivered as we should have, in my view. And lots around anesthesia training. And the building is just the start. So I'll rattle through processes. Our pre-assessment we don't have. We have a wonderful healthcare app with lots of infographics and huge amounts of patient information, including tapping into the complexity of consent and risk. And we have seen, anyone working in healthcare will have seen, I think, huge changes and impacts on children's health and children's mental health. I think an age of social media amplified by COVID, just terrible effects. We see a lot of anxiety, autism, and issues around that, and how we manage procedure-induced anxiety, particularly in those areas. We see it a lot in our dental children and families from challenge, who come from more socioeconomic environments that are much more challenging. So we're doing lots and lots of really important work on this around the quality and its impact on healthcare. But at the same time, going to work and having fun and delivering quality healthcare is so, so important. And, you know, I'd urge it in adult areas, but certainly for children here, bespoke theatre hats for our staff, embedding the theme of the birds and the artwork, and bespoke color chosen theatre scrubs for our teams. And then really how we personalize care and have fun. This is the children's bit of the boring checklist, going to theatre, all the safety aspects, boring but necessary. And the things drawn on there, I've got so many images of this, drawn and written: the rainbows, little monster, the family, and being brave and never giving up. Pretty good attitudes to have. So that's just something about children's surgery, and a really whiz through what's been my sort of wonderful privilege and love of being involved in that, and incredibly lucky to be so. But coming from where I came from with that privilege, and I guess that chip on the shoulder, you know, wondered about what I could do with the help of my family. From about 2005 onwards, I would take time out each year, a mixture of annual leave, but also very generous support from NHS Tayside as well. Has always been supportive of this in our department as well, in allowing time away. As an anaesthetist with an interest in children and airways, it's been a fantastic opportunity. Interplast Operation Smile, delivering plastic surgery for children with cleft lip and palate. Scotland, Malawi anesthesia, led by Katrina Connolly, now a retired colleague, and again ties into the Scottish government's links with Malawi around teaching and training, refresher course delivery in common areas: pediatrics, obstetrics, and trauma. These are what afflict these very young countries developing well. Excuse me. Facing Africa, I'll talk a little bit about PTC. Primary trauma care is a life support trauma course for developing countries. I had the privilege to work with Facing Africa, a charity delivering care for patients with noma or cancrimoris, not seen in Europe since the time of the concentration camps, a disease of poverty, and made popular by Ben Fogel. Did a documentary about this, and I've done about trips out there for 8 years. Sorry for the gory pictures, but this necrotizing condition has a very high mortality rate. Survivors will heal and scar and fibrose and produce the most horrendous deformities, and we would go in as surgical teams to try and support that, whether it be function, cosmetic, or both. Difficult sometimes to get a handle on that. When you run surgical clinics or visiting clinics like this, you get people come with all sorts of ailments. So all sorts of facial abnormalities. This is an ameloblastoma, neurofibromatosis. Not all of these things we could operate on, hemangiomas, lymphangiomas. And burns is really the scourge, if you like, of the developing world, and trying to do little bits that we could do for some of these patients. Not all are surgically operated. It's an opportunity to practice clinical skills, in this case, as I said, for children, young adults, and with my particular airway interest, fiber optics, front of neck access, but also the non-technical aspect, to be organized and deliver healthcare in suboptimal areas. Although I wasn't working in really truly suboptimal areas, which is the likes of which many anesthesia providers have to work in Africa. And so, just a couple of before and afters, this little chap came to see us a number of times. He had surgery, it recurred. He needed then a free flap, a localized free flap. And then he recovered. And so it's very difficult surgery in terms of, if this was a disease of the Western world, people would have a lifetime worth of plastic surgery there. You could do what you could in terms of function and what patients wanted you to do. Lots of teaching and training, which was an absolute pleasure, of local anaesthetists, practical skills, small groups. We also took fellows out with us as well to work with us and for them to teach. Navita, now an anaesthetic colleague of ours here. Much team working, complex cases, planning, and wonderful fun working with people. And so humbling to learn from people with huge experience and skills, who don't have resources we do, and trying to incorporate best practice for safety as well. Operation Smile, much more common condition, cleft lip and palate. So billions of people don't get access to this basic treatment and care. Surgical teams go out and provide care and treatment. I was lucky enough to do a number of these trips. They're invested in making the surgery happen locally. Obviously, it's not sustainable to keep taking people out. But I became more and more interested in training and education as time went on. So safer anesthesia from education, teaching, refresher type courses in pediatrics, my interests, and in obstetrics, but also in safe and best operating theatre practice. A model of which those of you who do ALS and other courses will be familiar with, of skill stations, small group workshops, scenarios, testing, and we train trainers in order to cascade the system down. So small group teaching, this happens to be in Malawi, in the beautiful backdrop of the Milanji Mountains. A lot of fun to do that. And here a number of skills being taught in terms of airway, vascular access, intraosseous needle insertion, airway management, etc. You might ask, does it matter? Does it work? What's the point? Just one of some of the follow-up studies showing in red here, in this case for obstetrics, that there's an uplift in basic safe fundamental skills, which when practiced are learned, because there's so much work in this area that can be incorporated into practice. Simple things like positioning, fluid access, resuscitation, etc. A little bit of a drop-off in knowledge over time, but really it's the skill set. So lots of pros and cons to this. I constantly questioned. I think it's important to consider ethics. It's always important to not impose treatments and ways of working, and to go quietly and humbly and listen to what people want locally. I think short trips are possible. One of the reflective retirement talks that Tom so kindly offers, and I think was by Phil Akou, my colleague. Phil are really engaged in long-term projects, and my kudos and my hats off to him for doing that. So you hope to do some good, but also what it does allow you to bring back is huge resource in terms of innovation and learning and being frugal and managing resources and training and being revitalized, coming back tired but revitalized. And there's much evidence for this in a number of reports, including parliamentary reports around the links, the benefits of the NHS going out and coming back in terms of being adaptable, open-minded, and leading changes in service. So I'm just going to go on now to some random musings, if you like, and I've always enjoyed Helen Bevan, who's had roles in very prominent roles in innovation and managing change. And I think we all need to work within teams and be part of organizations. But we all need to be empowered, I believe, to think about and manage and make changes that will impact primarily on patient care and make our lives better. But I reflect on my nearly 30 years there, and there's lots of obstacles to change. I'm very taken by these prehistoric creatures much threatened in southern Africa, this rhino roadblock. But you'll have come across in your career so many reasons why you can't do things, a feeling of rolling a boulder uphill. I think it's very important that we have organizations that allow us to voice different opinions. And I love this concept of being a boat rocker. So we don't all have to sit quietly and meekly and listen to a top-heavy, top-down system and structure. Yes, we need that, but you can be a boat rocker, which involves, I believe, constantly being passionate, being energetic, thinking about what's around you, being engaged with your colleagues by seeing possibilities. It's very easy to be labeled as someone who falls out the boat and whinges from the outside, and I'm almost certain that I've been labeled in that way. But I'd urge you to think about how you can stay in the boat and rock the boat from within in a positive way. One thing I missed out on, and I wish I had because I made so many mistakes in the early part of my career, we had no training in patient communication, in sharing bad news, in leadership, in managing conflict, in managing difficult colleagues. And I wish I had that. So there's so much available now in terms of the Scottish patient safety groups and leadership training and so on. This is a very busy slide, but again, one of Helen Bevan's, and I think it's really important. I think Action 7, the final one, we do need bottom up and top down stuff going on. We need a large scale framework, but we also need the small scale changes. And we need to be able to have contradictions and tensions respectfully and not see those as negative. Leslie Crichton's another colleague of mine, and Leslie is a wonderful example of long-term work abroad, and she gave a talk in our department about having a thing. I think we all need a thing. Working in the NHS can be draining. Having that thing of doing whatever it is, teaching, training, audit, working abroad, and I'm not suggesting that's for everyone, but also having that thing outside of work as well, of course, is important, that the sport, the exercise, the creativity, families and friends. Some random quotes, really. Gandhi, first, keep going. You may be ignored, then laughed at, then fought against. Those are quite harsh words. I felt that at times. But the winner is a dreamer who never gives up, and it always seems impossible until it's done. Just one, as I said, of many of those quotes from Nelson Mandela. As I say, I made mistakes in trying to go too fast alone around building children's surgery way back. But I then came to realize, as you have to, that to go a long way, we need to go together. This old African proverb quote. And then you need to hang in there, because it's very easy not to be disillusioned, but to think about change and be innovative. I was incredibly lucky, and we had luck and serendipity, and there was a battle, and then you crested a wave. What I would say is in the last 6 months, the wave was crested and I thought we were plain sailing, but ensuring continuity and ongoing thing, the last 6 months have been just as challenging in my career, if not the most challenging in many ways. And I won't say any more about that. I need to push on, but I think it's I think what we can't, there's a lot that we can't cure and we can't fix. But what we can be is we can be kind to people and to ourselves and to our colleagues. And I think that's what often patients will remember, even when things don't quite go to plan. And I think there's no doubt recent surveys showing dissatisfaction with the NHS being, as high as it's ever been. I think we need to think very carefully. It's easy to have these words, but I think just in my area of working, for example, maintaining dignity, it's a very depersonalizing experience coming into hospital and certainly going into theatres. We used to take people's dentures out, fast them for a terrible amount of time, stick them in horrible theatre, hospital clothing. It's very depersonalizing, knowing just the simple things of what someone's name is and who the person is and some detail about the person behind the disease. In theatre, we're all guilty of sending for the gallbladder or a list of gallbladders or hernias. I'm not suggesting it's easy to remember and talk about all those names. And how weird are we all, if you think about it? If we go into our ward environments or our theatre environments, particularly our operating theatres, everyone dressed weirdly and talking a completely strange language. So hats off to a couple of colleagues who've invested in a really, really simple thing. We've not been able to fix it. Physiologically, you don't need to fast before you go to theatre. You can drink clear fluids almost to your heart's content. We've not been able to impact it till Matthew Checkett's and Carol Gray managed to do that by a simple concept of sip-till-send. And I won't go into that in detail. Every clinic case, every day, every anaesthetic I did was a new chance. I think we have to be embedded in the daily workload, the individual care, but we also need to be able to step away and think strategic. We need that for our own development, if you like, as people and individuals and healthcare providers. And then there are lots and lots of really good people in Tayside. I've come across some of the most magnificent clinicians, nurses, but beyond that, the healthcare assistants, the clerical people, some wonderful unsung heroes around whom hospital departments literally hinge. There are so many of those, and they're highlighted, for some in the Star Awards, I know. But just be stubborn and obstinate and hang in there if the cause is right, but also take a little bit of time to step back. And just a little bit of tribute to Pavan Raju, my colleague. The most pressing issue for all of us, I believe, irrespective of everything we're trying to deliver in terms of healthcare, is climate change, and the impact on the environment and what that's going to do to health moving forwards. I'm going to rush through these by way of giving thanks. I've had so many collaborations, admittedly largely, as Tom says, across surgery, anesthetics, pediatrics, but wonderful collaborations with a charity, with a wonderful artist, Suzanne Scott, aka the Whimsical Lush, who's delivered our project, and I'm so pleased we'll carry on doing work around children's areas in Tayside. This has now been approved, and the emergency department jumping up and down to get in there, followed by others, I hope, outpatients and other areas too. Kay Fowley, I mentioned before, was a absolutely crucial lead in this. And on the left there, David Cunningham was the first CEO of Archie, who had the leap of faith to go with us. Some of you will know Rod Mountain, wonderfully involved in design and medical student training. The Archie Foundation, very dear to my heart, they allowed this project to happen. Their 2 million contribution to the 12 million capital project. So many fun fundraisers, colleagues having their hair cut off for charity, others growing beards for charity, fundraising balls. And then there were really bucket trail. Many of you, even outside of pediatric areas, would have had fun with your children, with your families in 2016. Wonderful, excuse me, city art trail. And just fantastic collaborations, and the most incredible night when this at the Rep, these statues were auctioned off to the tune of over £800,000. Was just absolutely mind-blowing and wonderful to be involved in. Paul Fetty is a wonderful colleague, along with Tom and many others who really put their bent to the task of Archie's, running, cycling, kayaking, and getting around these Archie Mountains, the brainchild of Paul Fetty's and others, and then putting us all on top of them on a wonderful sunny day, just a couple of years ago now. On one particular day, 130 peaks over 1,000 meters, having at least one person or more on top of them. Some of our wonderful team in the Children's Theatre celebrating the first birthday there, the 9th of May last year. Just having a bit of a wee birthday party. These are colleagues from nursing, from theatres, anaesthetic, surgical. Shout out to our play specialist colleagues who provide a wonderful service supporting children and families. Here's a group of them. They're not so many with us anymore. And to my surgical colleagues, I worked for my whole career with children's orthopedic surgeons, Donald Campbell, Jamie McLean, and we had the most fun doing some of the most complex surgeries for some of the most disadvantaged children. Amanda McCabe, Lisa Stephen, wonderful children's surgical colleagues as well, still working. Some of my dental colleagues, there are many more, Heather and Heather, and another Una Coleman. And I'm sorry if I've missed people. There are so many people I've worked with, and I've loved working with them all. My anesthetic colleagues, what a great bunch. You can see amongst those, Pam Johnson just retired, our medical director, Jason Hardy in management, Craig Cumming, clinical lead, and a host of other familiar faces that you'll recognize. A bit of the out with the grey and in with the new. There's one more addition to this, but Ian Belford, Callum Taylor, Karen Pearson there in the middle of the original picture, young colleagues to take forward children's anaesthesia, got every faith in them. And of course, we all point to mentors, friends, real influences in our careers. My roommate, if you like, or office mate, Willie McClymont, retired a few years ago. A wonderful friend and anaesthetist, and probably my closest mentor and ally, Neil Mackenzie, also now retired. Just a bit about the unsung heroes. Yeah, this is Leslie, our healthcare assistant. There's another lady, shout out, Margaret Doig. There are many, many others. And as I said, clerical people. Gosh, they produce a huge amount. And they are really unsung heroes in terms of what we do. And I shout out to them. My good colleague with Facing Africa, David Ball. Gosh, we had fun and we worked hard. That's me, really. I took a family trip out to celebrate just before retirement. On the left there, we're out in South Africa on our family farm. One of the boys grads on the right, Kilted Scott's sons, and there's a family picture on the left, and our little dog, of course. So I'll tootle off into the sunset. I'm not quite sure what I'll do. I'm just recalibrating for a while. Thank you for listening. I wish you all well. And I'm going to jump in my camper van for a bit and do a few other things. I've run on a bit, Tom. Sorry about that. Thanks for listening.
No, you've not. You have absolutely no reason to apologize for anything, certainly not in my book. It was a pleasure to listen to your musings and reflections. It truly was. So I don't know where to start, really. I think from a personal point of view, I mean, Leslie Crichton has written in the chat here, the man, the legend, Dr. Grant Rodney, which I think probably sums it up. You mentioned at the end there mentorship and the people who inspire us, and I think I speak for everyone who's worked with you that you are that person to so many of the current crop of trainees and consultants in anaesthesia, and those people like me who dipped in, were inspired, educated, and left us a better doctor, and I think a better person for having known you and trained with you, Grant. It's been a real privilege, and I only hope I could be half the doctor that you've been, to be honest. And so thank you so much for everything you've done. And again, on a personal note, you showed a picture of Jamie and Donald, with a lucky recipient of your anaesthesia for orthopedic surgery, and my son. And he has told me I can say this, so don't worry, I'm not breaching his confidence. You operated on, well, you anesthetized him when he was very small for what would have been otherwise a very significant orthopedic problem, and now he's 18 and thriving because of you. So so thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions or comments? I suspect everyone's just stunned in admiration, to be honest. Just lots of comments in the chat, just congratulating you on an inspiring career and thanking you for your talk. So let's call that a day. Grant, thanks very much again from everybody, and thanks for stepping into the breach here for a talk. I appreciate it very much.
Tom, and just finally, that's very humbling, and thank you. But you know, honestly, it's been such a pleasure. You know, I think NHS Tayside, tremendous place to work. You know, and just all the best to all of you, and just keep on trucking. And as I get on, I might need a little bit of healthcare at my side. So yeah, no, thank you, and all the best. And you know, for those of us retired, it's easy to sort of, you know, I know you're all at the coalface. You know, just seize those moments to take the time for yourselves and to do other things, and just think, you know, we're all so privileged to do what we do, really. Honestly, I wouldn't change. I wouldn't change anything. Anyway, thank you, Tom. Thanks everyone for listening. Appreciate it.
All the best to everyone. Enjoy your weekends. Enjoy all your retirement. I'm sure I'll speak to you again very soon, Grant. Take care, and we're back next week with the chief executive of ASH, who is going to come and speak about smoking, vaping, and the threats that both of those things have mostly to our children, actually. So Grant, you might be interested in coming along to that one. It'll be very interesting, obviously, from my perspective as a chest physician, but she's going to come and talk about smoking cessation, vaping, and all that goes around with it. Again, thank you, Grant. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you all soon.